Good morning. I see everybody's heads turning in the other rooms. Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Can you guys hear okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you. Let me explain a little bit to the people here in the ballroom in Hampton Plaza of what's going on the screen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Peterson, and we're going to have a workshop on our Homebuyer programs for you new awardees of home program funds.
Hey, Ann.
I will tell you.
Ann?
Yes.
We're not hearing you if you're speaking to us.
Really? Oh.
Maybe you're on mute.
Are you on mute?
Reggie, back here, they come from Penn
So they said there's no sound in Buffalo?
Oh, no. You want to sit here because the screen's up there?
I can hear Emma, but she can't hear me. Emma, can you hear me? All right. Hello? No? Okay, they're trying to work out the sound in Buffalo, but are we good in New York and Syracuse?
Yes. Yes.
We're not hearing you. No, Ann, we're not hearing you.
You're not? Okay. Okay, you're not hearing me still?
No.
No? We are. Oh, she can't hear me.
Okay, you know what, Ann? It was ours, so you're okay.
Okay, good. Okay, if I can have everybody in the regional offices mute your speaker, just because every time you guys all move, it's really loud. Okay, so I think we've got everybody. I'm just going to explain to the folks here in Albany what we're doing here on the screen. Currently, we're hosting this meeting in our Buffalo regional office, our Syracuse regional office here, and in our New York City regional office through our video system. And so right now on this screen, I have a conference room in Buffalo, Syracuse, and New York with other folks who've been awarded home funds. So they're all listening in today in our regional offices. So just to give everybody an idea of what's going on. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ann Peterson, and we are here today to talk about how to run your programs when you get home buyer money from the home program and the state's local home program. Most of you are here today because you're going to be doing home buyer. I kind of want to get an idea, based on how many people are in the rooms, who all is doing just down payment only, if you could raise your hands. Okay, and then, so I'm assuming the rest of you are doing down payment with housing rehabilitation, if you could raise your hands. No?
We're doing down payment and closing costs.
All right, so I guess we'll say that down payment and closing costs, if you're doing just down payment or closing costs. Okay. I'm looking to see how many folks are in the room who are adding housing rehabilitation to their home buyer program. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. The reason I bring that up is there's this home buyer orientation is for anybody who's doing home buyer, and we have a couple of things going on in the home buyer program. We do have LPAs who are just doing down payment and closing cost assistance. We have LPAs who are doing down payment and closing cost assistance along with funds for housing rehabilitation. And then we also have Chodo housing developers who are actually doing new construction or substantial rehab and then for sale to a home eligible buyer. So I just kind of wanted to get an idea. And in the presentation, we are going to have moments where we're going to talk about housing rehabilitation because there are a lot of rules regarding property standards in the home program. So it might not particularly be relevant, the stuff we're going to talk about on construction, but it probably will be helpful for you to hear, especially if you decide you might want to do this someday. Okay. I think one of the offices isn't muted. Can somebody check?
We muted?
Are we muted? No, we're not muted.
It's New York. Thanks, Mike.
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Can everybody see me on the screen in the regional offices? Just nod your heads because I can see you. Okay. All right, good. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, today, we have a paper agenda that we handed out, and they're up here on the front. I'm sure you have them in your offices. One thing I want to note about that paper agenda, you see those numbers in front of the items on the agenda? Those are the actual places where you'll find that topic in your administrative plan. So in your table of contents in your administrative plan, you'll see there's 3 general sections. There's program administration, there's going to be project, and then financial management. So those are the actual sections where you'll find the information on what we're going to talk about. Basically, we are going to record this as a video presentation, so you will be able to view it on our, from our website. We'll have the PowerPoint. You've got your note-taker slides today, so certainly you'll be able to re-review anything you hear today. We're going to talk about those administrative requirements. How do you run your program? What are the things we need to do? We're going to talk about project requirements. When we talk about projects in terms of home ownership and down payment, a project cost is the amount of money that you're going to give someone for down payment and closing costs. So that's considered a project cost. We'll do a 20-minute break, and we'll review the rest of the project requirements. We'll do a very brief session on financial management, and then at the very end, we'll do a Q&A session where everyone from each regional office will get a chance to ask a question. Okay, so you've all met me before, Ann Peterson, and I've been working in the home program since the early 90s, pretty much when it started, so I've pretty much seen all the machinations of what's happened in home over the years, and now we're all playing sort of a new game because of the new home rules. So a lot of this stuff, even in terms of the program administration, might be something you haven't seen before because it came directly out of the 2013 home rule. I want to introduce Stephanie Galvin-Riley, and I'm going to ask her to come up here into the camera so you guys can see her. She's our new assistant director here in the home program. She's been here since January.
Hi, everyone.
She's going to be coming out to do a lot of technical assistance with folks, and so hopefully you'll be meeting her soon. And Stephanie comes to us from Albany County Rural Housing Alliance, one of our great down payment assistance and home ownership programs. And she's a former housing counselor, supervisor of home program activities, a former LPA with the state. So she's very familiar with what you are all doing in Homebuyer, also with the Home Coalition. So we're very happy to have Stephanie here, and you'll get to meet her down the road. Thank you. Okay. All right, in New York City, I know I saw Mikey Sullivan somewhere. Is he in the room? There he is. He just walked in the door in the back of the office. Hi, Mike. Hi, New York. Let's talk to Kaylin Fernari in Albany. She's right over here in the corner, folks. I'm going to say hello. These are all the program managers who basically are the folks you want to be really friendly with and get to know and, have them help you out in your program. We've got Emma Watson in Buffalo. We could say, hey, I see her in the back there. Hi, Emma. And we've got Richard Baldwin in Syracuse. Where are you, Richard? I see a hand. Okay. Hi, Richard. All right, good. And then we've also got some folks here in our central administrative office. We've got Alex Smith, who's our manager of finance and compliance, and he's here in the front with Stephanie. And we've got Artisa Hill, who actually, is handling a lot of our administrative stuff. She's also going to be the person handling your setup and completion reports. And I think she's not here at the moment, but so remember that name, Artisa Hill. She's going to be the person who's going to be actually processing your setup and completion reports for IDIS. And there's our website. I'm just going to go over a couple slides that we had in our orientation session just to give everybody a reminder on contract execution. We have an aggressive schedule here. We want to get all these contracts executed by the end of June. And hopefully we'll have the authority to use grant funds and everything else. We talked about in our orientation session, some folks asked us about being able to bill non-choice limiting activities from the award date. We did agree to do that. You all need to be careful that you certainly don't do anything environmentally that are going to get you in trouble without your Tier 1, Tier 2 approvals. But from March 10th, you can bill under admin for the program, for example, for travel here, or, expenses you get here today. So from March 10th is when, technically you can start billing for those non-choice limiting things. As far as some comments. I'm just going to make some general comments about why we're trying to really do these more as technical assistance training workshop. There's a lot of new rules in the home program. We all get used to doing everything the same way we've always done it. And it's hard to change, especially as we get older, folks. We don't want to do new things. But the home program came out with tons of new rules. New staff. I know many nonprofits and municipalities have lost staff over the past 8 years, let's say, from the housing situation, and so many of you have new staff who've never worked in the home program or maybe only a little bit worked in the home program, and then now there's all these new rules. One of the things I want to make sure I make clear to everybody, I'd rather have you ask a question than do something wrong that's going to require you folks to pay us back any money. So please ask. Don't be afraid to ask us anything. I'd rather have you, learn up front how to do it right than to have a problem later that's going to really affect your organization. Technical assistance, we are going to try and get out there and do a lot more technical assistance one-on-one with LPAs. We are going to be providing things like new file checklists and by activity and as much as we can give you to make this easier for you guys to do every day. Fall training sessions. Monty Frank has been hired by the Housing Trust Fund Corporation to work as a technical assistance provider for the home program. And so he's going to be providing one-day sessions throughout the state in the fall, specifically on program administration for home. So you'll get notification on those one-day seminars and things like that. So we're very happy to have Monty giving us a hand. On plain English. All right, so much of this program is regulated by the federal government. So much of the language you read in the documents and in the paperwork is like, what do they want me to do? And so we tried to the best that we could, still working within the regulations, to write your administrative plans sort of in plain English, that you should be able to understand what you need to do from the basic template of the plan. And certainly I want to try and explain everything today in plain English. I'm not going to read from the slides. I'm just going to be summarizing them for you. But you'll have this available if you want to have this in your office for reference. I want you guys to know this is a partnership. I don't want you to think that I'm going to get in trouble, if I don't know how to do this, and if I ask them, then they're going to jam me up. I mean, that is not the point here. Unfortunately, there are some times when we monitor, there are things we just can't get around. But I would rather work with you before it gets into a situation, so please don't be afraid to ask. I don't care if you think it's just the stupidest question on the face of the earth, just ask. We want this to be a partnership, and we really do want you to succeed. None of us wants to see money laying around that couldn't be spent in your community. Many of you know over the years we've had to deobligate a lot of funds that were given out in the program. We've talked in the orientation session about the performance benefit initiatives, the idea of some multi-year contracts. We're going to have some deobligated funds we want to put back into the mix. So I just want to keep everybody, aware of that and that we really do want you to succeed and spend down this money. Okay. So we're going to talk about homebuyer assistance. One thing I also will bring up is I have to be on point today because some of this stuff gets really technical when we get into notes and mortgages and the liens you have to file and all that. But I will say that our HCR home program attorney is in the room here in the back, so I have to make sure, Bob Breton back there, so I have to make sure I explain these properly. Okay. So basically, we awarded 18 homebuyer assistance programs. 3 of those are Choto development projects where they're actually either gut rehabbing or newly constructing housing for sale to home-eligible buyers. We're expecting this group of folks to do almost 200 units across the state in the next 2 years. And some of you think about what you're managing. You might be managing 12 units or 15 units. I'm managing 710, And so sometimes, in terms of resources and stuff, I may have less staff than many of you. So I'm going to be honest in saying, we're trying to meet the needs, but it can be difficult to administer this many units across the state, I'll be honest, because I used to do 10, 12 in a program. Didn't have to worry about 200. General program administrative requirements, and I will tell you, everything we're going to touch on are pretty much what most folks got as an incorrect answer in the administrative plans. So anything we're talking about today should help you all to have the right answers to do any corrections that are going to be required from your program managers. We talked about the program schedule, this idea of 2 years, and so I just want to try and make this easy for folks. I don't want this to get overly complicated. But the rule of thumb we talked about in the orientation webinar is that you were going to basically make sure all your units were committed within the first year and then all completed within the second year. And if you see this schedule here, we made this very simple. How many units do you think you're going to have, ready for assistance qualified? So if you notice here, within the first 4 quarters, all of their applicants were qualified and ready to go. And that kind of should be your easy way to think about this. And then how many units are in the purchase process, and then how many units have actually been completed in IDIS, meaning they sold and the assistance went there. So really, most of your activity in terms of getting your applicants all lined up and getting them all ready to be the next one up is going to be in that first year. And then the second year, now with Homebuyer, it's a little different. It may be based just on, when folks, it's springtime. You're going to get tons of applications all at once. So it just depends. But and in terms of how much you're going to spend, so if you're doing 10 units at $20,000, You're going to spend 20,000. Well, in these cases where you have 2 closings, you're spending 40. So you're going to see this schedule in the quarterly reports, which is the next slide. So this is something new. We're going to do what's called a quarterly report. Many of you have to do it for other programs. Stephanie and I are working very hard to make sure that it's not going to be too difficult or time-consuming to fill it out. One of the differences in the 2013 home rule was that HUD now requires home participating jurisdictions to do monitoring based on risk. It's called risk analysis, risk assessment system. And so instead of HUD saying, you got to go monitor every year, now HUD says, you got to go monitor when there's a need and you think there's a risk of the person not being able, or the group not being able to finish the program on schedule and on time. So the information we get from the quarterly reports is going to be fed into our risk assessment system, and basically a score will be spit out to determine whether or not program management needs to come see you and give you some technical assistance. I mean, what determines risk? A simple one is if you send in your quarterly report 3 times in a row and you don't have anything set up, that's a risk for us. You're almost a year into it. So those are the types of things that you're going to be asked in the quarterly report. Budget policy. Many of you have seen this. This is new. We do have a copy of it in the rooms for you. And this was a lot of questions on this because it is new. What we tried to do was make this as simple as possible for everyone who's using home program funding and trying to figure out how to set up their budgets. And it also makes it easier for us as administrators to review your budgets and understand what's involved. If the budget that you submit in your application, once you kind of go through what we hear today, if there's any issues with it, you don't think it's right, this is your opportunity to redo it with your program manager's assistance if you need it, and get it to us, because we want to have the right budget before we get to contract. All right, so how much can you get paid to do this work for the state? Local program administrators can take up to 5% of the total award for administrative purposes, and then you can take up to 13% of the award for LPA staff costs of project delivery. And what this is this is really to pay staff who are working in your offices to run the program. And you take up to 13% of the award for that. If you're a CHOTO, you can take up to 18% of the award as a developer's fee at the time you sell the house. So CHOTOs do a little bit riskier things. They'll go out and get construction financing and do some things up front, and then when they sell the house, they'll actually get the home money to go back and pay their construction financiers. If you hire a consultant to administer, and I have bolded and underlined, administer your program, you can only pay them out of admin. That does not mean that you can't pay a consultant to do something like your Tier 2 environmental reviews, or your subsidy layering analysis, or your market analysis, or, but if you are simply hiring a consultant to come in and just run the program for you, you have to pay them out of admin. Okay? All right, so these are the 4 budget categories. We're trying to make this as simple as possible. This budget policy is broken out by activities, so you'll see in the policy if you're doing homeowner-occupied rehab, here's what you can bill under these 4 categories. If you're doing home buyer, here's what you can bill under these 4 categories. So these costs here today are the ones that are eligible for home buyer, and they're in the budget policy, so you don't have to write these down or anything. When we talked about project costs, under home buyer, what that really means is your purchase assistance, if it's going to be down payment, closing costs. If you're doing rehab, there might be construction materials and labor involved. If you're doing rehab, you might have some things like securing some buildings, demolition, site prep, or improvements as a part of that. But for the most part, in our home buyer down payment and assistance programs, your project cost is going to be the amount that you are directly going to assist the home buyer with to help them buy their house. These are all the different soft costs under home buyer. So basically, your budget's got 4 categories, and we want you to pick out of all these eligible costs your line items. Okay? So these are anything you can bill under a project soft cost for home buyer. These are eligible for staff costs of project delivery. And these are designed by activity because there are certain things like in home buyer for just down payment, you guys don't need a rehabilitation coordinator, for example. So HUD actually clarified it a little bit in the 2013 rule. And we made a decision as a PJ about what we thought was doable for you all to be able to bill under. So you're typically, the big thing in home buyers, you're doing applicant eligibility, you're doing, contractor, home buyer agreements. The home buyer and the LPA have to sign an agreement up front. And maybe if you've got rehab included, you might have a contractor's agreement. If you're doing any progress inspections for construction related to acquisition with rehab, you have to do cost estimates, scope of work. But for the most part, I think the subsidy laying and underwriting review is one that, basically under Homebuyer, we're going to be requiring you all to do what you're all doing already, which is like an affordability analysis. And so, you can charge, so if you have to take 3 hours to do that, so there are certain things. But these are just to pay your staff who are running the program. The thing about staff cost of project delivery is it's not admin, so it gets added into the per unit total in home. It almost never affects us because most folks, we're limiting 40,000 max for Homebuyer, in terms of the per unit assistance. So we're never going to invest enough that it might put us over one of HUD's new limits about the value of the property. But you just have to be careful. Like if you were working in a community where the value limits were 110 and you had a house where, you'd almost never hit it. You could put 30, 40,000, you still wouldn't have a problem with hitting that maximum per unit assistance limit. But just be cognizant of the fact that, when we pull up the bills in IDIS, you've got an admin line and then you've got a project line. And these are added to the project line. Okay. And when you bill for staff costs of project delivery, I need to see timesheets that directly show me that a staff person worked on a particular unit address, because it's based on a project being delivered. So it's project delivery. So we're going to have to show timesheets where we say your particular staff person worked on this Homebuyer sale, did application and intake for 27 Laurel Avenue, So we're going to have to, it can't be just like a letter on your agency letterhead. It's got to be just like a timesheet. Even if you all want to create one up front for it, if you're not sure if it'll work, run it by your program manager. But we have to have some way of showing you worked on a particular unit. And that's the big difference in terms of admin to pay staff. These are all the administrative costs. Some of the things, obviously travel, staff salaries, these are all the typical ones you'll see under admin. One thing I want to note here, many of you know it takes 200 home buyers to get one buyer, when it comes to counseling sometimes. So we're going to talk a little bit about home buyer counseling and the home program and what can be paid for. In terms of home buyer counseling, we can't pay for it unless the person actually buys the unit. So for all those folks that you counsel that don't get to buy the unit, you can't use home funds. However, the home program does let you slap in some of your administrative funds if it came right up. So let's say, for example, you counseled 10 people, 2 of them were eligible, but you spent 40 hours on those other 8 people. You might be able to bill that out of your administrative line if you want. So that's why it's here under eligible admin costs. So for non-home assisted units. So those are all the eligible costs in the budget policy. Just like I said, we've tried to make it simple, so just review it, look at your budgets that were submitted with your applications and see what you think. Affirmative marketing plan. So this was one of those things that it's new to the home program for every single activity. It used to be for certain ones. Now every single activity has to be affirmatively marketed in the home program. And what that means is you have to do advertising and make sure you're trying to attract persons to your program without any discriminatory practices based on the protected classes under federal law, which are race, color, national origin, sex, religion, familial status, or disability. And in the 2013 home rule, now everyone has to tell us how you expect to do that. What do you guys have to have in the plan? I'm going to tell you, it's right in your administrative plans. There's about 5 things that says, here's what has to be in the plan. And if you write it up and it's just a 2-page document, that's fine. This is about what you're really doing in your, in the street of your program to attract persons to your program to apply and to have the opportunity to apply. And you're really looking for the least likely to apply, So, if you have very, very low income homeowners who maybe aren't reading the newspaper or who aren't, seeing advertisements that you might be putting out in a newsletter or things like that, So maybe you go to every church in their neighborhood and you do a flyering there, And this is about, in the plan, just saying, what am I going to do to try and attract those least likely to apply? Now, I had a program where we were trying to attract folks. We went out and flyered the neighborhood. And we put flyers up in every steward shop that was around. You know what I mean? There's certain, every laundromat, and we got a lot of clients from that versus just a straight out ad in the paper. Description of how you're going to inform potential participants about fair housing and affirmative marketing policies. Obviously, in your advertising, you should have the fair housing logo. There's all kinds of stuff in the home program about that. And you want to tell people that, we are going to allow anyone to apply. You're not going to discriminate or restrict it. You want to talk about what kind of activities you're going to use to get those folks to apply. How are you going to do it without some sort of special outreach? Is there some venue in that particular area where those clients are that you might be able to access to get advertising out to attract those folks to your program? You have to tell us, what kind of records you're going to keep to show us you did that. If that's, I have a sign-in sheet where 15 volunteers went and flyered a neighborhood. That's a record. We're okay with those sorts of things. So, we just need to know how you're going to prove to us that you tried to affirmatively market these programs as HUD requires. And how you're going to assess the results. So let's say you look at what you tried, and let's say, okay, we decided we'd try every church. You didn't get one single applicant from that neighborhood. So then you got to sit down and go, okay, now what are we going to do if it didn't work? What's the next thing we're going to try? Because you got to still keep trying. So that's the point of affirmative marketing. If you target a special needs population, and most of you, if you did this in your application, we already have a copy of your service provider agreement or your MOU with that agency to directly give you referrals. If we did not get that as a submission in your application, make sure that you get it to your program manager. And basically, the whole point here is if you're going to target a special needs population, the idea here is you need someone to refer those folks to you directly. And that will guarantee you a much more success at hitting those targets. Okay, now we're going to move into a different area, written agreements and legal documents. And this is one of the things that's a little bit different. I'm going to equate this to sort of new rules for CHOTO development. Now when a CHOTO sets up a homebuyer project, they have to have site control of all the units that they're going to do and control of the construction process. And we can't execute their contract until they do. And so HUD is now saying, if you want to set something up in IDIS, you have to know that LPA executed their contract with the home buyer. So this is your standard agreement. After you've done your orientation session, you've got a client you think you're going to be eligible, they're on the waiting list or whatever. At this point, you have to have an agreement. So on our setup forms, you're going to see a new box that's going to say, did you execute your agreement with the homeowner or the home buyer? And you're going to check it, and we'll check it when we're out to monitor. But basically, HUD is now saying, look, we don't want anything set up in IDIS unless there's a true bona fide executed agreement for the home assistance. Now, in a purchase situation, it could be just the LPA has, orientation paperwork, an application you fill out. You all agree after you've done your affordability analysis that this person is eligible, and then you sign an agreement. It's not the purchase offer, for example, if it's not your house and someone's buying in the open market, that purchase offer is not the agreement between the LPA. It has nothing to do with the home program. So, you want to make sure in that homeowner agreement that you have it executed before you want to set up your unit. This is also important in homeowner-occupied rehab because you want that agreement signed before you start the work. But so this is kind of new, and we're going to be requiring that you tell us you executed your agreements. And then now we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritties here of what the home program requires in terms of liens, notes and mortgages, restrictive covenants for subsidy. When you do that written agreement with the home buyer, you have to disclose in that agreement what the terms and the conditions are for the home lien that's required in the program. And you have to let them know up front. You can't make it all of a sudden show up at the closing table, hey, we're going to do this lien, and So basically, go back and look at your agreements. That's kind of what we're going to be looking for to check them, because we're going to ask you all to see one of them, a template, before you sign your contract. So you want to make sure in the agreement that you've disclosed that there's a lien requirement in this program and what the terms and the conditions are. And we have to, what we put here is we do want to see this agreement. We want to approve it, just make sure that everything's in there so that there's no issues down the road. And you do have to do it before you set it up in IDIS. So there's a couple ways to secure the home funds in this program. Through the use of what lawyers would probably call a security instrument. For our purposes, and for the most part in home buyer programs, we're going to use a note and mortgage to secure the home investment. One of the things that may be new for some of you folks who haven't had an award in a while, The actual note and mortgage is now between the Housing Trust Fund Corporation and the home buyer. So we actually are providing you with template documents, lien documents that you'll actually fill out with the name, the address, and all that, and then you'll have them executed at the closing. But the agreement is now between the Housing Trust Fund Corporation and the home buyer. But you as local program administrators are going to be expected to help us execute them, help us deal with any issues down the road if there's period of affordability issues like recapture. Also help us in the event we've used a resale option and you might need to qualify another home eligible buyer to purchase the home. Some new things about these in the home rule and in our documents, they are assumable now based on the original contract terms and conditions. So if you do want to sell to another home eligible buyer, you can just transfer the subsidy to the new buyer, and that's written into the legal documents. So that's available. You have to use our provided note and mortgage. No other forms are going to be accepted. Okay. So most times on a note and mortgage, basically a note and mortgage is I'm going to put a lien on the property, on the house, that says that you have to live there X number of years based on how much you invest in home funds, and that if you stay there as a principal resident in the property for the number of years of the affordability period, you don't have to pay us a dime back, and we'll just satisfy it. The trust fund will be the group satisfying it. LPAs are going to be helping us as well. But for the most part, it's going to be the same terms and conditions for everybody. And the only difference here is how long it is, because it's based on the amount of money that you invest under home. There's some homeownership, in terms of after they buy the house, what are the two big requirements? And I'm going to point out this one at the bottom because I'm sure a lot of us haven't done this. But principal residency, obviously you have to check to make sure they're still living in the house. And then the other one is they are still supposed to have us listed on their homeowner's insurance as additional insured, because we're still a mortgage holder on the property. Just like the first mortgage, the home program might have the second mortgage. So that might be something that, even I didn't probably do that, and this came out when developing the administrative plans, that it's something we should do. So keep that in mind in your owner agreement. You might want to say, you're going to have to be required to list, the HTFC on your insurance policy as additional insured. And that's standard. It's not a hard process. You literally can call an agent up. They'll fax it back to you after you give them the name and address. So no big deal. We're going to talk about the resale. So first we talked about recapture. What that means is we're going to recapture the funds if you decide to move out before the end of the period of affordability or there's some other default. What we say is we require no payments on the lien. There's 0% interest on the lien. It will be reduced by either 1/5, 1/10, or 1/15 because it's either 5, 10, or 15 years, and we'll get to that in the slide. And it'll be reduced each year annually on the date the unit was closed in IDIS. So it doesn't matter what your document says. What the federal government now says is we're basing it on the date you close that unit out in our federal system. So what that means is the minute you executed an agreement, you want to make sure this thing gets closed out so you don't have to put another couple months on a homeowner of being able to relieve them of any debt, if they had to sell the house or something like that. If CHODOs are using development subsidy, so this is no direct assistance to the home buyer. This is, for example, $60,000 that goes into hard construction to newly construct housing. If you are using a development subsidy, CHODOs don't have a choice. They must use a restrictive covenant and this resale restriction. So the difference here is a note and mortgage, when there's an issue in the period of affordability, you have to pay the money back based on that prorated every year it reduces. With a restrictive covenant, it doesn't matter how much home funds you put in. It never asks for the money back. Instead, what it asks for is an affordable unit for long term. And the difference is the note and mortgage is attached to the house. The restrictive covenant is kind of attached to the deed and runs with the land. And so a restrictive covenant under our program would say you have to remain an owner-occupant in this property for 10 years, let's say, and if you decide to leave, you don't have to pay us back. No, we don't care about that money anymore. What we want you to do is sell that house to another home-eligible buyer. It's almost like a mini land trust deal in that we're getting, if it's a 15-year period of affordability, we know we're going to get 15 years of an affordable unit, therefore I don't need the money back. All right, so there's a very different way to do this here. One's going to require the money back and one isn't. I will tell you, for the most part, with down payment and closing cost assistance, you're going to be using the recapture note and mortgage. We'll talk about in our resale recapture policy, there are some reasons why maybe we would use a restrictive covenant. For example, an area that HUD has already determined is the entire area is under 95% of area median income on the housing prices and things like that. So there are reasons why we could use a restrictive covenant for different things. For the most part, restrictive covenants are heavy subsidy home program type deals where there's CHOTO development and you've got 60, 70,000 a unit. And usually the reason is there's no way you're going to put a lien on big enough because it'll be way more than the value of the property, and you're going to hold that person hostage, because they'll never be able to sell it for enough to pay off those big liens. So for $20,000, it's a pretty good deal. You'll probably be able to pay it off depending on your market if you had to during the period of affordability. But if it were 60, 70, 80, in development, you'd just never be able to pay that off. So heavier subsidy, typically CHOTO housing development programs will use that restrictive covenant. And so those are the differences. Recapture means I'm taking the money back. Resale means you got to resell to somebody else. In the restrictive covenant, you might see us mention how much home subsidy was involved, but you will never see a line in there that says pay us back that money. So that's the real difference. Resale is I don't want the money back, but I want an affordable unit long term. Recapture is give me that money back. And keep in mind, this home program is funded by taxpayer dollars, yours and mine, and we have to be good stewards of these funds, and so that's probably why the federal government have so many rules about this. I will tell you, I talked to Bob, our attorney, over this because we've had to develop restrictive covenants, rental restriction, a whole bunch of things that we hadn't had here. And, I actually said to him, I go, how much more complicated could they make this? Because I'm having a hard time, and I can't even imagine for some of you folks who aren't dealing with these regulations every day. It's not an easy thing to be able to understand. So there may be situations where either instrument could be used, and we're open to a conversation about that. One of the things we do want you all to do is decide and let us know if you're going to be using resale or recapture. We can pretty much tell from most of your admin responses. But we're going to ask you that question specifically before we get to contract. It's got to be chosen for your entire program. So you can't decide to do one homeowner, one home buyer with a covenant and one with a restriction. And so for CHOTOs, you guys might be dealing with this, but there may be a reason that, you're doing direct subsidy, who knows. So take a look at that. We're going to ask you the question specifically, maybe in an email, to just let us so we have something in writing. But I will say most of you for home buyer programs are going to be using the note and mortgage. We have these wonderful home buyer resale and recapture provisions, and these are specific to home buyer projects. We have a copy printed here for you today. I'm not going to go into everything about them. Recently, we had to update these. HUD actually required us to make some changes to it based on the regulations. But if you have a home buyer project where there's a recapture situation or a resale situation, and it's the period of affordability, and let's say the homeowner dies, there's a divorce, maybe they move out of the property, you have no idea what it could be. This policy tells you how we're going to figure out who gets paid what in terms of that home subsidy. I don't know how else easier to explain it. This gets very technical. It talks about one of the things HUD's programs don't want you to do is harm the seller, the prior home assisted person in these transactions. So there's a fair return on the investment for someone if they have to sell the house during the period of affordability. I guess just in a general sense, if they get their down payment and closing costs back, if they can document up to $3,000 in capital improvements to their home, they can get a reduction on the amount that has to be paid back based on that. So usually what happens is when there's an issue that comes up, I'll hand this policy to our lawyer and say, all right, can you figure out based on this how much they're supposed to pay back? So that's what this is. This is required by HUD. It's required to be in the state's action plan. It is complicated. It gets into housing price indexes and other things. But just know that if you get into a situation, this is how we're going to explain what's going to transpire in terms of that repayment. Okay? And it's very similar in terms of the regulations. It talks about the 5, 10, 15 years, all that good stuff. So the period of affordability, these are your 3 guides here. If you've got less than 15, you're looking at 5. 15 and 40, you're looking at 10. 40,000 over 15. And so that's what you're going to be like, the document for the note mortgage asks you how many years. That's where you're going to type in that year based on how much you put in. You have to record the note mortgage or the restrictive covenant as a part of your transaction. There's a record and return on the document that sends it back to us. So make sure it gets back to us. Typically we'll get one just because it's recorded with us. We're also going to provide you guys with an affidavit of exemption, which will exempt you from paying filing fees for recording this particular document at your county clerk. So make sure to look out for that. The lien, I said at the note mortgage, it's 0% interest. It just gets reduced once a year on the day the unit was closed in IDIS for the remaining period of affordability. And so each year it just gets reduced. If someone moves out on year 5 of a 10-year period of affordability, they're paying half of it back, roughly. Okay. If the person remains in the house, there's no repayment required. And then what happens at the end? How do we get rid of this lien? Basically, LPAs are going to be, and it says this right in the mortgage documents, but you're going to work with us to make sure that we can provide a satisfaction. We are looking into some self-satisfying documents that might be easier down the road, but for now, we're going to ask you guys, certainly someone might call you and say, hey, how do I, we want to deal with you, LPA. We don't want individual home buyers calling our lawyers directly, trying to work stuff out. So work, through them. You're their first contact. They're going to go to you first if something comes up. So we do want you to help us work with them. And for the restrictive covenant, we talked about this. It doesn't require any repayment. You do have to assist us to qualify a new home eligible buyer in the event that this does happen, if someone has to sell before the period of affordability is up. So we do want your help to help us and the person you previously helped to get somebody in there, that qualifies. And so basically you guys are going to get the templates, you're going to prepare them, you're going to have them executed at your closings. Okay. They are assumable by a new buyer, and it's based on the original term. So this can get confusing. A lot of times people, back in the old days, we all had both recapture and resale and assumption in all of our documents in violation of the regulations, in the early days. But basically, the terms and conditions are assumable under the original term. So if there's only 5 years left, that's all the new person has to deal with. They're still going to comply with the original terms of that very first subsidy, note mortgage or restrictive covenant. All right, so this is very new. I want everybody to listen up on this part. How much do you include in the lien? I think over the years, all of us said, hey, if I'm doing a $20,000 down payment assistance program, I'm going to put $20,000 in the lien because that's how much home money I spent. Well, HUD feels a little differently about it, and we certainly made some decisions as a PJ about what we think is fair. And we don't think the homeowner should get socked for paying your administration and your project delivery because HUD's already paying for that. So I don't want to see anything but project costs in the lien. So if you're giving someone a full $20,000 as a direct subsidy to maybe help reduce the purchase price, a direct subsidy to the home buyer, that whole $20,000 is a project cost. But if you put 15 in and then you had 4,000 to 5,000 in other things like soft costs, you had to get your appraisal, you had to determine your market value, So in terms of down payment assistance, if you go back to that budget policy sheet, it tells you what the project costs are, and that's all that should be included in the lien, okay? And if anybody has questions on that, we'll deal with it, after. But this is also one thing you guys can use to your benefit in your marketing. We're just going to be, putting in the lien what, the definite direct subsidy to you is. Okay? Soft costs are not supposed to be in the lien either, so underline, include only project costs in the amount of the lien when you guys are setting up your documents. Okay. Refinancing. We get a lot of stuff on this. Subordination. I know this is a lot of work. We've had a lot of requests for folks who want us to subordinate right now to reverse mortgages for seniors. So all across the state, we're getting, people calling about that. Usually we don't have a problem with it if it's for one of these 4 reasons. All right, one is to take advantage of a lower interest rate. We want it to be more affordable. But no cash out. You're just going to refinance that mortgage you had before and get a lower payment. You're not going to put $10,000 more in there so you can go buy your new car. So no cash out. And then if you have one of these three major sort of life events, you have a major home repair expense like, a tornado hit and took half of your tree, your roof out, something like that. A major medical crisis, sometimes health issues, people will take home equity loans to have money to live on because they can't make it on disability. There's other issues. Or a major education expense, could be a child, could be the homeowner going back to school. A lot of people will use a home equity loan to finance at a cheaper interest rate, typically a student loan. So we're okay, and you should put that out there in your agreements and your advertising, or talk about this at least once with the folks you're going to help so they understand, it's going to be there, and if you live there the 5, 10, or 15 years, it's going to go away. But if you want to go out and get more financing and take out more debt against your house, we're going to have to approve it, because we're in second position in most of these cases. Okay. Then we're going to talk about some project requirements. I will tell you, we do have a break coming up shortly, so everyone's going to get a 15-minute break in the middle. Project requirements are what's the deal with the housing I'm going to try and help? What type of housing? Now, when it comes to home buyer programs and the home program, we have a couple things going on. We have the open market housing, which is stuff where your buyers are going out trying to find a house in the open market. It's not a home assisted unit. It's not owned by a home chodo or anything. And they're just out there in the real estate market trying to buy a home. That's one thing. And then we also have what we kind of call home assisted housing, which is what the chodos are doing. And that's developing housing for sale to home eligible buyers. So that's actually owned as a part of this home project. So that's what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of things going on in terms of the home regulations about making sure that what you're doing is financially feasible, making sure that the home buyer can afford everything. A lot of this stuff is stuff you've all been doing over the years already. But just to give you an idea of the new 2013 rule and some of the requirements, we want to make sure that you're looking at the numbers involved. You want to make sure you're not putting in any more home money than needed. I'll give you guys an example of one of these. There are times in life in a home buyer project where it is not really going to make much of a difference if you slap $10,000 more on a mortgage. So for example, you may have a program design that says, I want to give everybody $20,000. But when you get to the numbers of this particular client, they really only need 10 to make it work. But you're like, I got 20,000, so I'll just put the extra 10,000 down on the amount of the mortgage, down on the amount to buy it. But over 30 years on an interest rate, that 10,000 doesn't even make a $2 or $3 difference on the payment. So it's not really helping someone to live more affordably. So you might need to make the choice there to say, hey, I'll give that 10,000 to somebody else who needs it. And that's kind of where this is all coming from in terms of determining how much your buyer needs to actually make this happen. And so HUD doesn't want you to give too much. We don't want to be over-subsidizing units when it doesn't seem to make good common sense. So we want you to look at things. We want you to look at the sources. Do they have the first mortgage? Do they have a gift letter for the down payment? Do they have savings? Is all that in there? The uses, if there's project costs, let's say rehab's involved. Is there enough money at the table to deal with the rehab based on, what people saw when they got into the house? Home funding, is the amount you're putting into it, is it reasonable? Is it necessary? It's not excessive. And you want your home buyer to be qualified or expect to be qualified, and for a first mortgage that's not predatory. That's not some sort of a secondary or third market item that's very high interest or other things. If you're going to do housing rehabilitation, you have to make sure and document the home buyer role. I'm going to be up front with you for folks who are doing rehab with down payment and closing cost assistance. The state would prefer LPAs to manage the construction and to help the home buyer. We all know as first-time home buyers, there's not a lot of them who are ready to take on a major construction process. Now, under the home program, when you combine rehab with the acquisition, you only have 6 months to get that property to code after purchase. And you're not allowed to inspect it until 3 months before someone buys it. So that's kind of a new thing. There's a slide about that coming up. But HUD now is saying if you're going to get in and look at a unit for a home buyer, we don't want you in there 6 months ago to tell us the condition. It's got to be within the past 3 months. So you have to document if this is going to be part of it. You're under the property standards in the home program for rehab. You're going to have to document your contractor selection, procurement, all that other stuff.
And could you just repeat that, what you just said?
that you have to document. So if you've got rehab in your programs, you're under the home program, it's federally funded, there's procurement rules and things like that, and we are going to talk about that very briefly as we get into it, but you have to document, that you've done everything according to the deal. It's not just like, oh, well, I got $30,000 and half's going to go to rehab and half's going to go to down payment, Okay. And so we do want you guys to help these home buyers manage construction processes if you're doing housing rehabilitation. I've seen some programs where they just left it up to this new home buyer and they just had no idea what they had to do, and so we don't want to see that happen. You have to make sure there's financial resources available. You guys all know this as doing home buyer qualifications when you're doing your affordability analysis and things like that. You got to make sure they're not paying a high interest rate and all that other stuff. You have to make sure you're looking at income and job stability. Many of you, if you're using housing counselors, and you're going to be required to as part of the home program, they're the ones who are going to be doing all this for you. Looking at things like sustainability. HUD wants to make sure that if you're going to help somebody, you don't want to put them at risk of foreclosure in the first 5 years of ownership because you put them in a risky situation that they couldn't afford, because that's exactly what happened in 2008. So HUD does not want that with these federal monies. And so we're saying, we want you to look at things like, what if you help them buy a house, but there's no insulation in it, and it turns out that the heat's going to cost them $700 a month in the worst winter. How is that going to be affordable? I mean, there are some things you got to look at. So we're just asking you to look at the future of living in the house too, and make sure it's affordable. One of the new things, the program design-wise, in your administrative plans for home buyers, that we do want everyone to have at least 1 month savings, cash savings in the bank after purchase. So we're not saying they have to put any certain amount down or anything like that, but we are saying as a basic standard of program design, we want to make sure after you help these folks, they got at least 1 month's mortgage payment in the bank. Okay, so that's what we're asking. And you're going to have to document that as part of your affordability analysis. Chodos, you guys have to do the same thing, only you're really looking at your project and your developers versus, your home buyers' affordability issues. We talked about consultants. There's big rules in the home program in the 2013 home rule about Chodos and a lot of changes. Chodos now have to have their own staff do this. They can't hire consultants to run their programs. So put that in there. Chodos have to have site control and have full control of the construction process. Want to put this out here just to let you guys know, some of your programs have done some preferences or priorities. We're not to contract yet, so certainly, if there are anything that maybe you just didn't put a priority in, certainly talk to your program management. But you can certainly design programs to assist certain targeted populations, so long as what you're doing is not discriminatory in terms of the federal fair housing rules and things like that. So you could design a program specifically for veterans or for, the elderly, but you do have to be upfront about the preference or the priority. You have to disclose it in your documents when you're doing your applications or your orientation sessions, so everybody knows. And you should let us know. And like I said, most of you did apply in targeted special needs populations in your CDOL portion of your application. And we talked about that in the orientation session. So if you're going to do that, that's fine, but we want to make sure it's disclosed in all your documents when you're out there doing your advertising. If you do serve special needs, we talked about this, about having that MOU or that separate service provider agreement that's going to send you direct referrals of that special needs population for your program. A good example of that would be, I did a home buyer program once where we had a target to assist women who had issues with domestic violence. And actually, as it turns out, quite a few of them were homeowners and needed some rehab done on their houses. And so we got direct referrals from that program for homeowners who needed help. So, sometimes it can work. Application intake and waiting list. If we ever get complaints about this, or if you have big, long waiting lists, this is where we get complaints because people are like, why am I not on the list? Why am I not at the top? How come I have to wait 6 more months? One of the things I wanted to tell you to try and free up some work for you all is that you don't have to do a full-on income qualification to put somebody in the queue or put them on your waiting list. It can simply be a self-representation of income and eligibility, so they could sign something where you maybe say, is your income under X if your family size is this? And they say yes. Do you want to buy a home? Is your, whatever you're going to put. But certainly, you don't need to do a full-on income verification to put someone on your waiting list. You can just do it with self-certification. Now, if they come up on the actual list, then you're going to have to do it. And in terms of income certification, under the home program, 6 months is your buzzword, because if it's 6 months, you got to redo it. The minute you hit 6 months, you have to redo it. So they're only good for 6 months. You don't want to waste your time doing 2 or 3 of them on someone who's going to be on the waiting list for like a year and a half. So don't waste your time on doing income certifications like that if you don't need to. You can place them on the list based on their representation of income. So if you have wait lists from prior programs, you certainly can use them for this program, but you must update everybody on that list within the past 6 months for it to be considered eligible under home. You have to take applications in a manner that's fair to everybody. So, for example, you don't want to take applications only at 11 o'clock at night from 11 to 12 midnight on a Friday night. You have to have it be accessible. If someone needs help, you have to offer it in getting to the place to do the application or filling out the application. You should disclose to everybody how you get on the waiting list. Like, you may have an orientation session where 50 people are in there and they're in the queue, and they're like, maybe they're good clients, but then we're going to get in and we're going to do some self-certifications, and then half of them fell right out, and these other half are going to go on the waiting list. So you just got to tell people how you're going to do it so that it doesn't give you problems. And you can do preferences and priorities on separate wait lists, and typically how this happens, if you're wondering, so let's say you have a home buyer program where you've got a preference to assist veterans. All other things being equal, if 2 home buyers came up, they're ready to buy a house, you take the veteran first, and that person would be the next one in line. So you would have a preference or a priority to choose that veteran, all things being equal, of somebody else waiting. So that's usually, most people like to keep those on separate lists, so then you can just kind of go like this. Homebuyer counseling. I formerly was a certified homebuyer counselor for many years, and I lived through the time when homebuyer counseling wasn't important in the home program or many HUD programs. I mean, HUD certainly offers homeownership and housing counseling, but it was never made a requirement. And for the first time in the 2013 Home Rule, HUD made it a requirement that everyone who gets assisted in a homebuyer program funded with home funds must have housing counseling. Now, what kind, what type, how much? We'll talk a little bit about that. It's not overly prescribed, and we're going to try and make it easy for everybody. You have to use a HUD-certified counseling agency. Some of those agencies may have the funds to pay for that counseling, so you can't take it out of the home program and double bill. But you must use a HUD-certified counseling agency. We checked, and there's availability in all of your areas, so you should be able to find someone to do this for you. Many of you may be housing counselors yourselves and do this. But what the state is asking is, I want something showing they've completed a pre-purchase homebuyer counseling, regimen, whatever that might be. I'm going to leave that up to the certified housing counselors. But I just want them to have a letter saying they are ready to proceed to purchase a house. And really, that's what I'm going to want in the file to document to HUD when they come and say to me, how can you prove to me that these folks have this counseling? And say, here's their completion letter, their certificate of completion, whatever it's going to be, that's something you're going to want to get. And so this, timing-wise, you're going to have to remember this takes time sometimes. You're going to have to plan this into your program design and how you're going to run the units. Underwriting the home assistance for the very first time in the 2013 rule. Everybody pay attention on this. HUD has requested or required us as a part of the new regulations as a PJ to develop homebuyer underwriting guidelines. They did not give us major specifics on how they wanted it done, so we just tried to make it really easy. And so any of your programs, when you're qualifying home buyers, they have to have a max housing debt ratio of 35% and a max total debt ratio, which is adding the housing debt plus any other credit debt, of 45%. So the housing debt ratio is how much money a month are you spending of your monthly, net income to pay for your housing, your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance. Total debt is how much are you spending a month to pay for your housing plus your credit debt. And they're a little higher than typical banking ratios, but we feel that's okay for the affordable housing industry. Out there in the real world of banking, you'll see 28 and 36 are their typical numbers. Housing debt no more than 28%, but we all know we're dealing in the affordable housing industry. We're lucky to afford someone 35% on a housing debt ratio compared to what they're already paying most times. Most people are paying maybe 50% of their monthly income for housing. So total debt to income ratio is 45%. If there's no other credit debt, so if someone just has the housing expense and they don't have a car payment, they don't have a credit card payment, they don't have a jeweler's car payment, whatever, you can let that housing debt ratio go up to 40%. Okay, so basically what we're saying with that is they don't have any other debt, so they could probably afford a little bit higher of a housing payment. Okay, and we're going to want you to document on your affordability analysis or your worksheets where you're sitting down, even if you have to deal with this, maybe if your counseling agency is doing this, we're going to want to see that based on, standard lending practices that they meet these ratios. And this is standard for all of you doing these programs. The buyer's got to have enough money to afford this or they're not going to get through these programs. I mean, there was a time that a lot of people couldn't afford things and people got mortgages and bought houses, and we all saw what happened with that. When it comes to the home program, we just really want to make sure that, you're not going to set somebody up at failure or risk of foreclosure. So you have to document to us that they got 1 month cash savings. I don't think that's asking too much. If we get any pushback on that, I would be surprised because it makes common sense to just about everybody. And then, we're just going to want to see that you did this analysis. You looked at the housing debt ratio and the total debt ratio. And I'm not asking you to create anything new. My guess is many of you or your housing counselors are already doing this, already have a worksheet that you're already using. We may be able to accept that. So, I wouldn't overthink all of this, but it's stuff you're probably already doing already. But now we're just asking you to document it, So subsidy layering, that's just about, if somebody's buying a house and they only need $20,000, don't give them 40. That's all this is saying. And you're supposed to look at the financial sources and uses. And sometimes this really is important because you can miss something in the big picture. So one time I added up everybody's stuff and they were going to buy a house. And I thought I had it all locked in and all the numbers were good. Then I realized there was $3,000 short when I added it all up, and I went back to the homebuyer and said, what are we going to do here? They eventually got a gift letter, but had I not looked at the big picture, I might not have seen that till I was at the table and we were short. So we just want you to take a big look, an overview of what's going on with the finances. Questions came up about documenting immigration status, so we put this one slide up for you, because there's different things, but the home program does say in the federal regulations that to be assisted by home program funds, you have to be a U.S. citizen or a legal resident alien. And so we're asking you to have folks do a self-certification to say whether or not they're a U.S. citizen. If they say no at that point, then you can ask them, can you give me some verification? So we would probably have it in your application or something where you ask the question. And then based on that, you can either say, fine, we're good, or I just need to document. Okay? And so a qualified alien is someone who can receive federal benefits under the federal law. So like a resident alien green card, many of you have seen, or those should be good. If you're going to deny somebody assistance, you got to tell them. You got to tell them in writing. That would be the preferred deal. But you have to go through the process. And so maybe you've got housing rehab and you look at the house and there's just no way you can ever get it to code with the money you've got. That just might not work. And there might be times where you're going to have to say no. This just isn't feasible. And so if you do that, the home program gives some guidance on that and says if there's not enough money, you do have to do an infeasibility determination and you should document it and you should send them a letter telling them the reasons why they weren't qualified. Okay? Oh, it's break time, everybody. Yay! We will now enjoy a 15-minute break. Everybody meet with the folks in the offices, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Let's see, I see. Hello, New York, Buffalo, Syracuse. Hi, Richard. I see you. I know. Well, yeah, people up here are saying it's like romper room. You guys ready? Everybody, wait. Okay, if everybody's back, we're going to go ahead and get started. So yeah, some of this stuff is very heavy information, but don't get worried about it because it's all here in the presentation. There's going to be a recording if you need it. So, and believe it or not, everything you see here is in your administrative plan already. All right, so now we're going to get into some heavy-duty stuff here that is kind of different in the home program compared to how it used to be. Everybody knows that HUD came out with these homeownership value / after rehab value limits based on your area. There's basically what HUD is saying here with these maximum property value rules is that you shouldn't be investing in housing that's too wealthy for affordable housing. I guess that's kind of where they're trying to get to here. And so what they're saying is, the house that you assist someone to buy has to be under a certain value limit. So you're not helping someone buy, of modest income, buy like some house, that is not of modest income. And these programs are targeted to folks under 80% of median. So you're probably not going to be helping a lot of folks who are going to be over the value limit. However, I will say there are some communities like Saratoga County, I know here locally, their limits are very near what their housing is, in terms of if you're going to rehab a house, it might go over the limit. So we have these limits that HUD gives us. Each and every year they're printed on the site. Basically what HUD is saying is we're giving you these value limits for your area that tell you that if the house isn't worth more than this, then it's under 95% of the median purchase price in your area, which would be typically affordable to most of those folks under 80% of median. So the whole point of this is that, and if you throw money into rehab it, or if it's just purchased, it shouldn't exceed 95%, of the median purchase price in your area, because that really would not be an affordable product. But you don't have to determine that 95%. You don't have to do a stitch of math. You just have to look at the limit HUD gives you, look at the assessed or appraised value of the house you're working with, or if you're going to do rehab, what's it going to be worth when it's done, and see if it's under the limit. That's as far as this goes. Okay? If you find one that isn't, that might be a project where you have to say, I'm sorry, but this is infeasible, and the reason is it's not under our value limits that HUD has given us in the program. So in terms of the maximum purchase price, that's like this idea that if the value limit in your particular county under HUD's list is $110,000, what HUD is saying is somebody in your program shouldn't be buying a house for more than that. It's the maximum purchase price, okay? And then in terms of the after rehab value, because many of you, if you're going to do rehab with down payment and closing cost assistance, you're going to be fixing that house up. Now, will the value change dramatically? Maybe not, because you're not doing additions. You're probably going to be fixing something that's already there as a repair. So you're probably not going to be doing much that's going to really change that value. But you have to keep that in mind, and you have to make sure that you know this up front before you get started so that you don't end up investing all this home money in a house that's not going to be within the limits, because then you got to pay all that money back. So look at these limits before you say, yes, we're going to help you buy this house. How do you document it? Basically, you have to determine the value up front. You have to know how much this house is worth. And there's only 3 ways that the state's program is now going to let you do that. One is, you do have to determine, if you're going to do rehab, you have to determine the value up front, and what's it going to be worth if I put this $25,000 into it. You have to consider it when you're determining the scope of work. You don't want to do so much work that it might send you over a value limit. And the cost to determine how this is done is an eligible expense under home. It's a soft cost. So if you want to get an appraisal done on the properties, the home program will allow you to charge that to the program. There's only 3 ways we're going to want you to do this. One is a licensed appraisal. We will also accept a real estate market assessment, which are usually about half the cost of an appraisal. And those are dealing with a real estate company who will actually do a market value assessment in current times on what they think the house is worth. Or you can have an independent estimate by a knowledgeable professional. So what this means is And the reason I threw this in there is we had someone an LPA who wanted to have a retired assessor in their community do the value assessments, and we thought that was a knowledgeable professional. So sometimes there may be a reason to have a knowledgeable professional do it. So one of these three ways, don't worry about this. Don't worry about, we have to charge this to the program. I might not have money for this. This is something that is required, but I don't want you guys to spend more time on than calling up and getting one of these things done and finding out what you're expecting. Because I'll use that to show to HUD, look, here's the value limit. Here's what they, it's documented to be worth, and they didn't go over it. So there's no monitoring issues. Okay. Just to go back to that, keep in mind, anything to determine those values is eligible under the program. All right, we're going to get into property standards meeting New York State Code, and we are going to talk about the differences in purchase acquisition only as compared to purchase with rehab when it comes to what the house and the condition has to be at purchase if you've got no money for rehab involved. But basically, I will say everything in the home program except for tenant-based rental assistance requires that you meet New York State and or local code at completion. Whether you're doing rehab or not in a home buyer program, there's no rehab money involved. That house has to meet code before or at purchase. I will tell you, a lot of folks in prior years wanted to use an HQS inspection to document code. That is not a valid documentation of meeting New York State and our local code. It's more for tenant-based rental assistance or a rental unit inspection. I will say there are issues all across the state over this. How do you get your local code person to come in and give you, some sort of statement saying it meets local code? In home buyer programs, a lot of times the bank is going to require something already, to document that it meets code for a home buyer situation. So I would certainly check with the lenders first to see, because they may have some sort of a requirement that a CO or some sort of certificate stating it's up to code or is ready for occupancy is available. If it's new construction, you'll always have a CO. Certificate of occupancies are almost always geared towards new construction in the industry. But we have some issues across the state where, there may not have a lot of building inspectors in the community. Maybe there's one inspector working for 3 communities 20 hours a week and you can never get them. Or they don't want to come in and require you to do a building permit or even to get like a certificate of completion for the things on the building permit. So I just want you to know we understand that. We know that. We've done quite a few workouts now with different communities across the state to come to a workable solution to be able to document it meets code. I think this is good for everybody because it puts an independent person in this mix saying the house is in standard condition. You're going to have your structural inspection typically done by your home buyers anyway. But this will document that there are no current code violations or health and safety issues is really what we want to know.
And will that stand up, the home inspection?
The home inspection is not a determination of it meeting code. It's a completely separate thing. Yeah, so in terms of, there isn't any area in New York State that is not covered by New York State code, so every municipality has code rules and regulations, whether it's from the state or whether or not the local municipality has adopted more codes or more. So code is everywhere. And so if you have a specific issue in your community about getting something from the local building official saying the house has no current visible health and safety needs, hazards, doesn't have any code violations that they can see, and it appears to meet all applicable, New York State and local codes, a statement as simple as this is fine for me, as long as it's on the letterhead of your code official, okay? So and keep in mind, if they have to come out and do an inspection, that's something that can be paid for out of the program. That might be a way to draw somebody in and say, I can pay you $50 if you come out and do one of these inspections. Now, I will tell you, and this is not going to work in every community, but in some of the workout situations we've had, code officials have agreed to attend at the same time as the rehabilitation inspector from the program to develop a scope of work if you were doing rehab. And they've agreed to give a list of anything that was a health and safety violation or a code violation. And then the LPA was going to make sure those were done in the scope of work. Then the code official would come back when it was completed and say, oh, good, they're all taken care of. And they even agreed not to put the homeowner into the code violation process because they knew they were specifically going to be working in one of these grant-funded programs. So a lot of times if you get a code official in the house, they're going to just let's say you walk in and there's hanging wires and, which many of you see in a lot of these, even in home ownership deals, they're going to say that's a code violation. And so that's the type of thing that's going to have to be fixed to make it meet. So if any of you have real issues with this in terms of documenting that it meets New York State and our local code, let us know and we'll see what we can work out. So if a house is going to be acquired and there's no funds for housing rehab, whether it's home funded or not, if there's no money for rehab, the house has to meet our property standards when they buy it, which means it has to meet New York State and our local code when they buy it. And the reason here is you're helping a low-income home buyer, and we know they don't have money to fix up a house. I mean, you've already depleted everything they had just to get them into the house. They don't have extra money. So this house has to be pretty much in good shape when they buy it. And that might be a conversation where you're working with home buyers, and you might have to counsel somebody. Maybe you should, you are not going to be able to buy that house because there's just not enough money to fix it up, or, there's no way to deal with it. So for those of you doing down payment without any rehab, the assumption here is you're helping them buy a house that's in good shape already. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be brand new, but it has to be not have health and safety issues and code violations. If there's minor repairs, and we'll talk about lead-based paint specifically in regards to acquisition purchase, but if there's minor repairs, like let's say you have to do a lead-based paint inspection and you see there's chipping and peeling paint, if you need to do some scraping and painting under, typical interim controls, that's not going to make all the full-on property standards come into play when you get into the rehab world in this program, like procurement, contracting, all that stuff. So if you're doing a home buyer deal where you don't have money for rehab, but let's say, in a program I ran, we had all of our paperwork up front, we told the sellers that there may be a situation where repairs are going to have to be done to make the house meet code in order for my client to buy it. And I'll tell you, 90% of the time the sellers did it, before the person bought the house. And usually it was, $1,000 worth of painting, or they had to put a handrail on the front porch, or, And sometimes it was the sellers bought the paint, the new homeowners went over and painted the room, So, I mean, there are ways to kind of work this out on little tiny things that are going to, but just know, little minor repairs, throwing a handrail on or something is not going to put this into a full-blown home program rehab job. Okay. This is new in the home program. So the home program specifically is saying now that if you're going to inspect a house, let's say you want to go in and have a code inspection done, you should not be in that house any earlier than 90 days. So what this means, what HUD is really saying here is if you're going to check out the condition of a house, check it out within 3 months of somebody buying it. Don't have your inspection was a year and a half ago when the person originally qualified, because who knows what happened to that house in the past year and a half. So HUD is saying now, whatever inspections you do to document that it meets code, you got to have it done only 3 months before, and no, can't be 4 months before. It's got to be 90 days or closer to the purchase. If it doesn't meet the standards, like let's say you get in there and, it's got code violations, it's got all these other problems, that's going to be an infeasible project because you don't have money for rehab and it doesn't meet the property standards. All right, so now we're going to have Beth Ryan come up. She works for HCR in our Syracuse office with the Weatherization Assistance Program. And she's going to talk about weatherization assistance. We are doing a partnership with the state's weatherization program and the home program. Most likely, most of this activity will be on the homeowner-occupied rehab programs, but we're saying that anyone who you're going to target under 50% of median income, and if you're doing rehab with your program, you should include weatherization. I know that when we looked at our homeowner-occupied units, more than half of them, maybe a little under half of them, were going to folks under 50% of median. So we're going to see that partnership really ramp up. But I wanted Beth to talk today about the weatherization program for any of you who may have clients who you're helping. This may be a way to get weatherization done to their homes. And even if you can't help them, I wanted you to hear the information today so you could learn about the weatherization programs, because even if you don't have rehab, you're going to want to refer these home buyers to these programs for assistance. So come on up, Beth.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Okay.
There you go, ma'am.
Right there.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about our program. For many years, we've talked about wanting to be able to fully coordinate a lot of our efforts. Obviously, we all have the same mission: safe, sustainable, efficient, affordable housing in New York State. So I'm just going to briefly go through some very modest outlines of the weatherization program and then leave you with a couple takeaways. As Ann said, we expect that a good number of these units will be below 50% of AMI. Weatherization's income levels are 60% of the state median, but in most cases, the 50% number will qualify for weatherization as well. We expect, because the number of units over the 2-year contract is well between 8 to 12 units generally, that's not an unworkable number for our subgrantees in that 2-year time frame. We expect that that partnership will be able to incorporate energy efficiency measures within the scope of your rehab, and we're encouraging them to work together prior to the finalization of the work scope so that we can come up with a list of items that both funding sources can work together to pay for. We always provide an energy audit. It's an instrumented energy audit that's approved by the Department of Energy. Upon completion of that, we would expect that the housing group and the WAP provider would work together to develop a work scope that is consistent with the needs of the house. And in cases where one client might not be able to qualify for one program, when we put both together, we may have the resources that we need to complete the project. We have priorities in our program that senior citizens, families with children at risk, and persons with disabilities. In this category, anybody who receives SSI food stamps, well, SNAP, we call it now, heat benefits, they're categorically eligible. All you as a housing organization would have to do is document that receipt, and the customer would not have to do anything further to prove that they're eligible for us. And we're encouraging everyone to develop an MOU so that each party knows what their responsibilities will be and what they're willing to do and bring to the project. And we're looking now to come up with templates that we may be able to help you with. And there are two things that I do want to leave as a takeaway. One is that if you're just doing closing costs and down payment, by all means, as soon as that happens, refer that customer to weatherization so that we can come in and do the audit and complete the work that's necessary to make the house more energy efficient. And also, in the case of rehab, as soon as the customer has identified that house and you're really confident it's going to move forward, contact the local weatherization provider, and they can begin to work with you on the timing and development of that work scope. And we will be available, I myself will be available to anybody as a resource. I can travel anywhere in the state to help facilitate this relationship. Thanks.
So, I will tell you guys, as folks who have done contracts in the home program, I'm a big believer in weatherization in terms of housing rehab. I do think it's a real important move to make energy efficiency wise. There are other programs. So, for example, I gave an example out the other day of, you go in and you replace all these windows, but then you never insulate the walls, and there's heat bill's still $600 a month. You know what I mean? So at first blush, we are targeting this specifically to anybody who's under 50% of area median income, but you may see this become a requirement in all rehab. So, I don't know resources available or whatnot, but I certainly would like to see weatherization as not even think twice about it if you're going to do housing rehab. And certainly for those homeowners who aren't doing it, please, like Beth said, certainly let those home buyers know that the state has a weatherization assistance program that's grant funded to come in and help them to do some of these energy efficiency measures. And keep in mind, it's set up so that, when they come in and they do that energy audit, they're making a decision on what they call it a savings to investment ratio, I guess would be the way to put it. But, how much are you going to save on your energy costs versus how much are you going to invest? And the way the program's set up, there's certain things they can't do if you're not going to get anything out of it. And so a lot of times you might not see windows have anything to do with a weatherization job because you're not going to get increased energy efficiency out of those, but you will out of insulation in your walls. So, it's nice to have, a process and a program that folks can access for help. All right, so housing rehab order priority, and even though some of you aren't doing rehab, it's good to know this if you decide to do rehab in the future. The home program came out with very clear standards for housing rehab and the priority and what you look at when you fix a house. So right in the order you see it on the screen is the order that you have to look at when you're developing your scope of work to see if your project's feasible. We want all health and safety issues. I don't want you to go spend $20,000 to help somebody buy a house and leave them there with a big old health and safety issue or code violation, you know. We definitely want to see all those code violations gone. You want to make sure every major system in the house has a useful life of 5 years. And you want to include disaster mitigation. So if you're in an area where a flood zone, for example, you might have to raise up a foundation. If you're in that area, that's going to be your next step. And then you have to include weatherization or energy efficiency as best as you can to deliver a code compliant unit. So everybody who's doing rehab under the home program now has to go by this. So it's a little bit different. I'm not going to go over too much as we have too many folks doing rehab, but just to give you an idea, something new in the program now is that you have to develop a scope of work, a written one, and I think most people would think, yeah, everybody does this, but there's a lot of times they don't. You just pick up the phone, you call the contractor. Because we require that the major system has to be a remaining useful life of 5 years, I just listed here what the major systems are in terms of HUD in the home program. We have our rehab standards out there that have been out there forever. We haven't changed those. We'd like to update them. We're looking for capacity to do that, but you still have to go by those too. New to the new rule is very clear direction on developing a scope of work and a cost estimate. Don't let the bid process determine your price sort of guidance. A lot of folks will say, oh, I'll just put it out to bid and that'll tell me what it's going to cost me. But you should know up front before you put it out to bid what it's going to cost you. And, do you do price quotes, use rehab inspectors and whatnot, to determine that before you get going? Because you really need to know this up front. Because what if all 3 contractors who bid on your job are really 25% over, 30, 40, 50% over what your bid, your in-house estimate was? You can throw them all out and bid it out again. But if you didn't know that, you go, oh, I'll just take that guy, or, that girl, or, whatever. So, HUD wants you to have a written cost estimate and a written scope of work. All right, lead-based paint. This is one of those things, we're just going to go over this. It's always an issue, unfortunately, in the home program about following these regulations. It got a little more confusing with the whole new Environmental Protection Agency, lead renovator and all this. So I guess the easiest way to explain this is for years, all of us working in federal programs had to deal with lead-based paint. And now the private industry, all of a sudden, 20-something years later, after HUD, now has to deal with lead-based paint too. So we were all doing all of the regulations regarding lead-based paint in federal programs a long time ago. Now, basically, those same rules in a general sense have been moved out to the private housing market through the Environmental Protection Agency. So we don't want you to screw up on this. These are statutory requirements. If you screw this up, you pay the money back. And we don't want that. And so even when you're doing acquisition only without rehab, pay attention, because we're going to talk about what do you have to do in regards to lead. If there's renovation, you're under the EPA stuff too. All right, so risk assessments, you have to be certified now to do these, but basically someone comes in and they're looking to see what the risk is of lead-based paint in the unit, and they also do sampling and testing and all kinds of things as a part of the risk assessment. The state no longer allows the presumption of lead-based paint. Used to be you could say, oh, I'm going to just presume it's there. I'm not going to test it. Now we say if you're going to work on an area, you have to test it. So you can't presume it in terms of a risk assessment. The results of the risk assessment have to be incorporated into the scope of work. So if you happen to go out and somebody takes a look at it for lead-based paint and they come back with, hey, there's deteriorated chipping and peeling paint in every windowsill and sash, that's going to have to be dealt with or it's not going to be a feasible project. All right, so if you're just doing acquisition without rehab, it's a little bit different. All right, so if the house was put into service, built before 1978, which is the same rule for people who are doing it with rehab projects, then you have to deal with lead-based paint, because the assumption here is in 1978 we stopped using it, and something built after 1978 shouldn't have lead-based paint in it. I'm sure there were 20 cans of saved lead-based paint somewhere that somebody slapped up on the house. You never know. But you need to know that if you're dealing with a house under 1978, you're going to have to deal with this because you're using federal money. As part of the inspection, they have to identify deteriorated, and in the lead-based paint reports, you'll see intact and non-intact. Intact means it's not chipping and peeling and there's no problem. The dust is not escaping out through those chips and peels. So you can have a surface that's full of lead-based paint, but it's intact and it's just fine and you don't have to do anything to it. If it's non-intact, so it's chipping, peeling, you have to use what are called interim control methods, and that's where you have to go in and scrape and paint and re-encapsulate the lead. So it's back under the paint again and not chipping out into the world. As a part of the inspection, they're going to notice deteriorated paint. Now, let's say you're doing a home buyer project and you know that you still have to deal with lead-based paint, so you're going to send in a risk assessor, and they don't have to do a full-on risk assessment, but as part of the inspection, if they see some deteriorated or chipping paint, remember when I talked about minor repairs won't hit the property standards and turn this into a full-blown rehab job? If your lead-based paint person goes in and there's a couple surfaces that aren't intact, they can be made intact and then you're good to go. So if it's required, though, to meet the property standards, like you've got code violations and housing violations, then a whole nother level of lead-based paint stuff comes into play. If there's minor repairs to meet the property standards under the homeownership option for this with acquisition only, it's not considered rehab, and so then it doesn't make all those rehab standards get triggered. Here's the housing inspection. This whole idea of the lead-based paint is also here with this 90-day thing. So you shouldn't be checking lead-based paint 6 months before somebody's going to buy it either. Same rule. And if it doesn't meet the standards, it might be an infeasible property. So just so I don't confuse anybody, basically you're required to go in there, have an inspection done. If there's anything under interim controls where you've got non-intact paint, you're going to have to deal with that. HUD requires workers who are certified, this, that, and the other thing. But typically, if it's just a minor repair, you're not going to get into the whole other, rehab standards and housing rehab orders and priorities and things like that. All right. Clearance, this is the other thing. So you do all this lead-based paint stuff and you get your work done and you're all good. You have to document to us after you've done rehab that you got rid of all the lead dust, and the only way to do that is through this clearance inspection. And the clearance, I'm just putting this slide in here. On our website we have a webinar that Monty Frank did in 2014. It is very specific to CDBG and home and the state lead requirements. It's a great presentation, so if you're unsure about this, it's very easy to read and go and get it. So this is one of his first slides. One of the issues with lead-based paint clearance is if you don't do it, it's not an eligible unit, and then you have to pay us back. All right, so a clearance examination involves visual. I'm going to look to see if it looks like everything's all done. They're going to take dust samples, soil samples, dust wipes to see if there's any lead dust, in the areas where you're working. They're going to send them to a lab, and it's going to come back and say it's clear. We didn't find any dust on the swipes, the soil was good, and you're good to go. But if it comes back that it wasn't, which is happening a lot, the thing I want everybody to know is the home program will pay for the first clearance, will not pay for the second or the third. All right, so if you've had it cleaned by your contractor and we pay that, whatever that amount is for that whole clearance thing, and it fails, it's your responsibility, or make sure you as an LPA put it on the contractor as a responsibility to pay for that second and third clearance. Because every time you have to clear it, you're going to get the samples and all that going to the lab, and it's going to cost some money. So the home program will pay for the first clearance. I will tell you, most times when this fails, it's because the contractor didn't clean it properly, or whoever was responsible for cleaning the unit after rehab didn't clean it. A lot of times, I had one project that took 4 times. You just never know, but, so you do what you can, but the home program will pay for that first one. And lead clearance needs to be done immediately after the rehab. It can't be 6 months later. We've had a lot of folks who just kind of forgot to get clearance and then said 6 months later, well, how about if I go in now and do it? Well, that's not going to cover it. It's got to be done immediately after you're done with the work. All right. Procurement and contracting, we'll just go over this a little bit. Just as a general rule for all of you, even if you're procuring other services, we'd like to see 3 bids. If you're getting a CPA out of your admin money, or you're, hiring something else. We'd like to see them properly procured with actual requests for proposals and bids. And even if you want to document it all, if you do email bids and you throw them out there and then you take copies of who you sent them to and then who responded, any kind of documentation is fine, to be able to show that you put the program out there. You don't want to be saying, we have a lot of folks that say, I only got one bidder. That's okay for a little while, and it can be sort of explained away in areas where there might not be a lot of contractors, but over and over again, it could be problematic in terms of the feds and their procurement rules. So, we understand, and if you can document, you put it out there 4 times, it could get anybody but 2 people. I'm okay with that, as long as you can show me you tried. And keep in mind, you only have to hire the lowest responsible bidder. Use that term responsible for anything you procure with your home money. It's got to be responsible to what you need to have done. You don't have to take it just because it's the lowest price. You could take someone who was a slightly higher price but demonstrated to you they would be more responsible. So, use that to your advantage. State MWBE, Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise, there's plenty of rules about that when it comes to procurement and contracting. And also Section 3, there are new regulations surrounding that, so we're going to host a separate webinar on that for LPAs, so you don't have to worry about that today, but we will be coming up with that. Some of you have asked about this, the super circular, what is it? And I don't know, many of you may or may not have seen this in the past, but there used to be omni-circulars, and basically what these are rules that the federal government wants you to follow if you receive federal funds. And so they used to be broken up into this guide for nonprofits and this guide for municipalities. Now it's all into one at 2 CFR Part 200, and it's called the Super Circular. It includes municipalities and nonprofits. And so what is it? So basically the federal government says if you receive a federal award, you're supposed to do this. And it took me 15 years into doing the home program before I ever opened one of these up, number one, when I worked for a city. This is like higher level federal regulations. But it's all about cost principles and procurements as organizations, conflicts of interest, there's some new provisions regarding subsidiary organizations and things like that. And it's all about procurement. So like they talk about micro purchase and how you're supposed to procure things by using a micro purchase standard or by small purchase. A small purchase example might be a city might have a purchase policy that says if you buy something less than $100, you have to get 3 verbal quotes. If you buy something between $100 and $1,000, you have to get 3 written quotes. If you buy something between $1,000 and $10,000, you have to put it out to a formal bid. So some of this stuff, if you guys don't have any sort of procurement policies at your organizations, well, just by rote of being a municipality or a nonprofit accepting federal funds, you're kind of supposed to be going along with these guidelines. So that's why we have these slides in here. If you ever have extra time, you can go and take a look. But it's interesting. There's an appendix in here that gives you all required contract provisions for construction contracts. There's a lot of information. All right. And so, I'm just putting that out there so you guys understand. It used to be parts 84 and 85, cost principles for municipalities and nonprofits. Now it's all one big book, 2 CFR 200. All right, in the last part of our workshop, we're going to talk about, in a very general sense, some of the financial management requirements. This is specific to drawing down money on disbursements and paying for your down payments and things like that. We've got uniform administrative requirements that come along with every federal grant, every federal award. So even though you're getting your money from the state, this came from the feds before us. So the home program is federally funded, and so they have uniform administrative requirements. That Part 200 has a whole section on it. Cost principles, audit requirements. So this is going to be a place you can go take a look if you haven't thought about this for a while in your organization. CHOTOs are exempt from these cost principles and things like that, but they still should also, in their procurements and other things, have reasonable cost principles and things like that. Okay. All right, so you got to have basically what HUD is saying is, and this is like what you're already doing already, but maybe you don't think about it as you're already doing it. But basically, when you get federal money, HUD wants to make sure you have internal controls and procedures to keep fraud away from taking that money or to keep other issues happening where the money's sitting in your office for a month before you spend it, or different things like that. They want you to have, effective control and accountability for these home funds. They want to make sure that, records and reports that you have about the money, like, for example, all your closing documents from a closing showing what was put at the table towards the down payment and closing costs and all that. We want to be able to show where all the home money went, and if somebody asks, you should be able to tell us exactly with your paperwork. We want to make sure that you're doing the required reporting and subrecipients and all that. So, the quarterly reports we have coming up, for example, we want to minimize, we've had a lot of down payment programs where, we've had an issue because the home program is a reimbursement basis program. So we're not allowed to advance funds to you for the down payment. And so we know that it gets very tricky when you're trying to schedule a closing. And the rule is the check's not supposed to sit anywhere for more than 15 days or you got to send it back. So we want to, we've had a lot of issues with this where we funded the money, the closing didn't happen. Well, now we could get in trouble because we sort of advanced you the money and you still haven't spent it yet. So that's what this is about. They just want to make sure that you've got the financial things, in your agency that's going to keep this home money, safe. You have to provide for internal controls, policies, procedures, job responsibilities. I mean, you don't want one person in your agency qualifying the applicant, qualifying the house, agreeing to how much the down payment is in the subsidy, handling the closing, writing the check. You need some controls in there and some checks and balances. So, you may have an executive director who signs the checks with 2 board members, or you may have an in-house policy that the person who handles the check has nothing to do with determining if something's feasible. You know what I mean? So they're just that's what this is about. Budget controls. Do you have a way to compare, your budget line items? Do you have a way to know that, hey, I spent this much on admin, I spent this much on this house and this street and this address, and I did this on down payment. I had to do $600 in minor repairs over here. Accounting records, can you show us the source in the application? I will tell you, one of the things that can be problematic with homebuyer programs is getting the lender to appropriately document the subsidy on the closing statement. So it's no longer a HUD-1. What are we calling it now? The new housing disclosure or something. Yeah, it used to be the HUD-1 for us older folks in the room. But we want your HUD-1 to show this subsidy. Sometimes there are issues with loan to values and how the banks add it in and don't want to put it here or put it there. But work with that lender and say, look, this is an affordable housing program. The feds and the state are going to make me show that this money crossed the table. I want it on your closing statement, as down payment grant, or however you want to do it. But we'd like to see that. Cash management, obviously, funds get wired into your account for a down payment. Nobody in your organization should be able to go grab that and go to Tahiti. Those types of things. So, requests for disbursements. This is a little bit different. There's been a lot of changes in the Fed's system for getting money for states and other cities who are home PJs. And because of that, we don't want you to set up units until you're ready to give us a bill. Because now HUD has, in the system, it cancels units automatically for no activity, no disbursements. And now, as someone administering the program, it used to be we could fix this ourselves in IDIS. We can't anymore. We have to go to our HUD reps, and it could take a long time. And, so there have been all these changes with the home rule, and all of those new requirements are slowly being worked into the international, the integrated disbursement and information system. Everybody's laughing up here because I keep saying international. It's integrated. So we don't want you to request money if you don't need it yet, because we can't really pay you advances. We will pay it once the cost has occurred, though. So, if that means that your cost occurred and you send us the bill right away, we want to get the money to you as fast as you can so you can then pay your vendor. It's not exactly a true reimbursement program that way, but at least it gives you a little time. The other option, one thing I saw on the financing and all the different costs eligible in this program, certainly if you want to take out financing to upfront the down payments and then we pay you back and you pay back your financing, the interest and financing fees on that is an eligible home expense under project cost. So if that makes it easier for some of you to do this without having to wait for the state's money to show up, it can work very well. I mean, sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to pay you, but it's not that we're not going to pay you, So think about this in terms of financing fees being an eligible expense under the home program if you want to upfront some of this stuff for down payment. In terms of CHODOs, they don't get their money till after the house sells. So even when they're requesting their developer fee, it's after the house is sold. If you're doing homebuyer assisted housing rehab, basically we want for any type of rehab in the program, and we made this for all of our programs, if there's any rehab done, we want the homeowner, home buyer, the contractor, and the local program administrator sign off on every payment that gets made for construction. I want everyone to be happy, and I want them all to sign off and say that the work has been completed satisfactorily. Because that's where the biggest complaints come, is bad rehabilitation or problems with contractors and this and that and the other thing. So we're going to require that you document to us that everybody's okay with it, everybody's satisfied, and they've all signed off on it in order for us to pay it. You definitely are going to only bill us for what the cost is incurred. So, for example, if it costs you $300 to get an appraisal, don't bill us $450. If it costs you $350, that's what you should be billing us for it. Because sometimes people will say, well, it took me a half hour to coordinate that appraisal. Well, that's project delivery, whereas your appraisal is a project soft cost. So there's a difference. So certainly if you only paid a certain amount, that's all we're expecting the bill to be. Rule of thumb here in terms of the money, commit all the money, just like we said, commit all the eligible applicants within the first year, commit all the money to those applicants in that first year, and then spend it all in the second. Just kind of as a rule of thumb. It might take, it's a little bit more difficult with Homebuyer because it really depends on if someone can find a house sometimes and at what point they become eligible. It's not like a homeowner occupied rehab job where you just take the next person off the list. So it's a little bit different. All right, so this one, if you're going to request funds for admin, make sure you're within 15% of what you spend in project. And this is for the reason that we're not allowed to pay for work that hasn't been done in the home program, and we're not allowed to make upfront advance payments. So we can't pay you for admin you haven't delivered yet. And so sometimes in this program we've had folks bill out, front load a huge bill for all the admin in the beginning of the grant. We really weren't allowed to do that technically. So from now on, when you're paying your bills and you're trying to draw down your admin, we want you to have some, you want it to be within what your expected project cost expenditure would be so that we can show that you're administering some actual units. So just putting that out there. This is, we talked about the integrated disbursement and information system. This is basically HUD's way for us to get the money. To give to you all to do what you need to do. Because of these new things in IDIS, and because it automatically is canceling units for no activity and no disbursements, you may get a call from your program manager saying, what is going on with 15 Smith Street? It is completely frozen up our IDIS system. So what happens is, if HUD's going to cancel it, we have an opportunity to explain it. Or we have an opportunity to not be able to explain it, it gets canceled, then we have to deal with a HUD rep in New York to see if we can work it out. Now imagine as a state, if we're doing thousands of units across the state, there could be a lot of stuff going on with this, so it can really come up. And so you might get a call from a program manager where they say, I need to know exactly right now, I haven't seen a bill on this place in 12 months, you set it up 12 months ago, give me a bill tomorrow. We're asking you to please respond to program managers' requests for anything like this down, as you do your grants. Because what happens is when IDIS freezes up, then we can't pay any bills. So the whole system stops until we do what HUD wants us to do in it and get the explanation or tell them why, there's this red flag issue on a unit. But it really can be difficult to manage a program when that happens all the time. The period of affordability, we've talked about this in the beginning, but it starts when the unit is closed out in IDIS. Those restrictive covenants and notes and mortgages actually say that now. So it'll say the anniversary date of this note and mortgage is the date that the unit was closed in IDIS. We are going to have people send you back when you complete them your IDIS closeout date. So you'll know that for your files. And the real problem here, it shouldn't be too much of a problem because we're going to require that you send us your completion report along with your final request for payment. So it probably won't be an issue, but we had a lot of issues where people did, build out all the money and then just never filed the completion report. And so HUD says you have to do that within 120 days. But if you wait 4 months to do that, your homeowner's going to have to wait 4 months before that next chunk of money gets chopped off that, what they owe. So you definitely want to close them out as quick as you can. Okay, so that's good. And that was about it. All right, so we're good on the time. We're running a little over. This recording we're actually recording this. We'll have the presentation available. If you have any questions that we don't answer in the Q&A session that we're going to do right now real quick, send them to Artisha Hill and she'll get them to me and we'll see what we can do. So I'm going to start out in the Buffalo region, the farthest from us, and see if there are any questions.
You are.
What?
We don't have any questions, Ian.
Okay. All right, Richard.
Actually, we do have one, and the comment was that you did a very good job.
Right. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
There you go.
All right. Syracuse.
Wait, Ian, we do have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Reggie.
Right?
Go ahead, Reggie.
Okay, so
Can you hear him?
the way that I've been doing environmental modifications with OPWDD has been that that we pay out half of the lowest bid that was put out for them to start the job. So you're saying to me that once the modification piece comes into play, after the consumer has purchased a home and it's time for the rehab, no monies will be disseminated until the job is completed. So are we expecting the contractor? Go ahead.
So I think I'm going to put this up here so you can hear me. So you might be confused, and I don't want to confuse you, so I'm going to explain this. All that we're asking for in terms of your administrative plan, if you get in there and look at the section where the rehabilitation is, we want you to hold back 10%, but that's the only requirement we have, so that we want you to hold back 10% on the rehab job until completion. But other than that, how you pay is fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You're
I
welcome.
misunderstood.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ann.
You're welcome. Okay, Syracuse? I see Syracuse.
Okay.
For acquisition only, would a home that our agency owns be eligible for the program? Could the buyer use the down payment funds to purchase that home?
I don't know if you own it. You're not developing it like under a program. It's just something you have in your portfolio, like a house you're selling.
Currently renting it, and she would like to buy it.
Okay. So you're wondering, can you help her with the down payment assistance on
Yes.
a property you own? Okay.
Yes.
I'm not going to answer that exactly because I want to go back and look at a couple regulations to find out. I think in terms of, some rental projects where Chodo's own a rental project, they're able to do something similar. So let me find out for sure. I just don't know if there's anything conflictual that might be in there. But what agency are you with?
Covenant Housing in Syracuse.
Okay. I have somebody taking notes on the questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions in
Anyone else here?
Syracuse?
No. All set?
No?
Hi, Ann.
Okay. Good. Hi. Okay. How about New York? You guys must have a lot of questions. You have an amazing housing market to deal with.
Yeah, we do. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Talking to us. It's
I think
us.
she said New York.
Okay,
We're live.
we in there? We're on?
You're on.
All right.
I have a couple of questions, and they're related to a home buyer program and how it interrelates with the weatherization assistance program. And the first question is the energy audit. Is an energy audit useful in demonstrating and documenting that the unit meets New York State code, the property standards?
No. So basically, the Weatherization Assistance Program is going to do energy efficiency improvements, and usually they're going to do maybe insulation or caulking or other things like that. But they in no way are inspectors of New York State code. Typically, when we say we want it done by a New York State code certified inspector, that's someone who's going to work in your municipal code office who would provide that inspection. So the weatherization folks are not going to be able to document that the unit meets code.
Well, we're a little concerned with getting code inspectors out to our units down here in southeast Queens or Queens
Right.
County. So how
Right.
about, you said a home inspection doesn't count. How about a home inspection that's done by an engineering home inspection, done by an engineer?
Well, I will tell you, and certainly if there's any direct issues in your community, we can try and work them out with your code officials. And I know they're not available all across the state, but there are third-party state-certified code inspectors who you could hire to do this inspection if you can't get it done through your municipal code office. So there is a third-party subset of inspectors who you could hire almost like a consultant. But certainly I would prefer to see if we can work something out in your local community to see if we can, get that code inspection done.
Okay, next question. Weatherization traditionally has been considered a program, a minor repair program, generally, because the investment's less than $5,000 unless you replace the heating system. So we've been told that minor repairs, and I'm just talking about now in a home buyer situation, do not trigger the rehab standards. If weatherization assistance is awarded to a unit in the home buyer scenario, does that trigger rehab standards? If it's a minor repair program?
It depends on the timing. So if you have a weatherization person in there in the middle of qualifying and making this whole situation eligible, you're having rehab done on the house, which most likely isn't going to happen in a home buyer program until after they own it. But if for some reason the rehab was going on during the home program activities, you might, if you're doing rehab, you're going to hit the rehab standards. What I would say is in terms of not hitting the rehab standards, when you're doing acquisition only, you're just going to provide the home assistance for purchase. Then after the purchase, you do the referral to the weatherization, and you have them come in after you've already assisted the home buyer. So, and that's in the projects without rehab. If you're doing rehab as a part of your project, the rehab standards and the property standards are already into play under home. So, it doesn't matter if it's weatherization or anybody else. But for the most part, I think in home buyer programs, you're not going to have that happen until after the purchase. Now, if you're including home funds in a project for purchase and rehab, you're always going to hit those rehab and property standards no matter what, because the home money is going to be paying for the rehab as a part of the program. But in acquisition only, and you're doing minor repairs like some paint touch-ups because you don't have rehab going into the project before the purchase, you're only going to do those minor repairs. You're not going to hit the rehab standards, and usually they're only specific to lead-based paint or, putting a handrail on a stairway if your bank's requiring some sort of code thing. But if you're not doing any rehab, nothing should make that happen. So I would try to make sure that if you're not providing rehab and some other program is going to come in, you make sure that happens after you've done your home assistance.
Okay, so I'm gonna assume too then, if we were leveraging access to home for an accessibility modification, we follow that same procedure and we go in after the closing and after the home program has all been done, right?
Absolutely.
And so we don't worry about the rehab standards. Yet we got a note from our environmental review folks that we have at the discretion of HCR, a program, because we're leveraging weatherization and access to home, has been converted from categorically excluded B to A, given that funds from
Let me
other
tell you-
entities may be used towards rehab, and it doesn't really follow. You know?
Well, let me tell you why that happened, and let me tell you, because we were involved in that. I've personally had discussions with the environmental folks about this. So when we created the stock admin plans, there are some things in the home program, for example, the rule about if someone has accessibility needs and you're doing a rehab job on their house, you're supposed to provide those accommodations to someone if they need them. So that was in the stock admin plan. So the environmental folks saw that and they said, hey, this program's just doing down payment, but they might have to do rehab. And then many of you mentioned in your administrative plans that some other program was going to come in after you were done that was going to do rehab. So because they're reading your administrative plans, they came back to me and said, look, even though it's not home money, you know, they've mentioned in their admin plan and the new rules under NEPA are, it doesn't matter if it's home money, it's any rehab in the process. So if you have 6 different sources of funds and, you know, 3 of them are going to do rehab, you know, you're going to have to deal with the rehab level. So what EAU did was they came back and said, look, we can tell from what your folks wrote in their admin plans that many of them are going to go on to do rehab of some sort with somebody else, some other program, after you're done helping somebody buy it. And so for that reason, because it doesn't matter if it's home rehab or WAP rehab or access to home rehab, in terms of the environmental, any rehab mentioned means they have to go to that next secondary level of review. And so that's what happened. Now next year, when we do our RFP, we're going to give some very specific guidance to folks to say to them, you know, because I think a lot of times people will put stuff in the application to make it sound better, like, oh, when I get done helping somebody buy the house, I'm going to refer them to this program for rehab and that program. And just by saying that, that makes environmental say, hey, somebody might do rehab, so we have to go to that secondary higher level. But we're going to give you some more guidance, and we'll probably try and remove some of those things that made that secondary review a requirement. But that's what happened with that. Yeah, and that has nothing to do with home. That is strictly NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act regulations. So that's why that happened to your particular project. So most likely somewhere either in our stock admin plan or in something you wrote, you said, after I get done helping somebody buy the house with the home program, I'm going to go get them assistance in the access to home program where they're going to do, modifications and a ramp. So they just can't. The rule under NEPA is any rehab. Doesn't matter whose it is. Okay? So does that answer that?
It does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any more questions?
Be careful writing it up next year.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I will work my best. Any other questions? It didn't give you any other additional things that you had to do because of that. That was just the environmental unit going to that secondary level, but it didn't require you to do any additional work, right?
Oh, I'm not sure. I thought we needed to publish anyway, but they said something about having to publish, but I thought we had to do that anyway. So I'm not really sure if there's any additional work. No.
Okay. All right, good. We'll make sure and try to clarify that. It was a surprise to us when our environmental folks came back and said, wait a minute, you guys said these folks were just doing down payment, but we saw they were doing other rehab for these folks, in terms of the project. So that's why that came about. Okay. Any more questions in New York? Are we good, Mike?
We're good.
Okay, thank you. All right, how about the Albany region? Any questions here? Go ahead.
So as a follow-up to that, the other programs people want to use, like CDBG, even entitlement funds or another grant,
Right.
has probably had a programmatic NEPA review or site-specific reviews already. So should we, to be clean with home, should we strip mentioning of rehab?
Now, home is.
After closing,
You don't have to worry about anything because they've said we're going to go to that secondary level of a review. It doesn't matter because that will make it eligible for home if somebody else in the project is doing rehab. So you're okay. But it's the home review that will now include, if you're going to do rehab, your programmatic tier 1 review is going to say you're eligible to do that now, whether you decided to or not, even if you just casually mentioned it at the back of your application, that you might then help somebody with the Access to Home program. So you shouldn't have to do any more programmatic reviews on the other programs. Now, the other thing is, though, and because this is new to, for us even, it certainly does make you want to sit down and think about this if you're going to combine a whole bunch of different sources. So when you are going to combine CDBG and home and you're going to apply for the CDBG first, maybe you're going to start that program and down the road, a year into it, you get your home funds. Certainly in that programmatic review, you're going to want to mention, I do plan to hopefully get home funds and do this rehab. But it's something you should think about. And I guess the thing is, I asked the environmental folks, was it a lot more work to do this secondary level? And they assured me it is a little bit more work, but it's nothing egregious, So I think it's good. And this is about any rehab. So the minute you guys mention rehab in your down payment programs only, that means they got to get that review, that higher level. So, okay. Go ahead.
Kind of a follow-up to the
Yep.
follow-up. So if we're using USDA 502 Direct, and they're going to do a rehab component after closing, does that trigger the rehab
Yes.
activity?
It does, and you should be upfront about that when you guys are doing your programmatics. There's your checklist of what you're going to do. And this is about in the project. So if every homeowner is going to get assistance after you help them buy it with the home program, and they're going to go through USDA for rehab, you should have your program. The problem you get into trouble with the National Environmental Protection Act is if you do activities that you've not been approved to do. And so if you didn't get rehab added, technically you'd be in violation of NEPA laws when you got to that second part of your program and the USDA came in to do the rehab portion.
Even though the activity was the purchase of the home?
Oh, you're talking about the mortgage?
The mortgage.
Oh, well, a mortgage is not rehab.
Okay.
But if you're going to take a piece of that to do rehab because it comes with mortgage money and rehab money, then you should let them know up front that that's expected in your program. Have them do that level of a review so you don't get hung up once you get going.
Okay, so if I have a purchase with USDA and Rehab, but I'm only providing down payment and closing costs of their whole program.
You're still going to have to do that secondary review because you're going to do rehab.
But can I draw the money at the time of close? Or do I have to wait until the completion of the rehab?
Typically, the first mortgage is coming in the same day as your down payment assistance, in terms of when it happens. There's almost no way to get around it because especially if that USDA program says we are going to provide X number towards the first mortgage and then this amount to rehab. We're, in terms of the environmental review, the Housing Trust Fund is doing a lot of the work now for nonprofits and we're working with consultants. Don't risk this. Just get the secondary level if you think rehab's going to be involved.
I'm talking about getting the money.
Well, in terms of all right, so once you help somebody buy the house, you can get the money.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just trying to think of, but it's not like all of a sudden, let's say you didn't get that review, like the worst case scenario and what you're talking about.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, so let's say you didn't get it, and then we gave you the home money, and then I found out the house was all opened up in rehab, and you didn't apply, and then it was ineligible for home. So it's much better just to deal with it up front in the programmatic and not have to worry about it. Worst case scenario, you're in violation of the National Environmental Protection Act, which there's all these rules about that, but then for the reality of it is because you didn't comply with that, it's not home eligible, and now you got to pay us back. So we don't really want to see that happen. And I don't think this is anything that's going to kill anybody's project, and reality is if you're planning, even if it's not your money, to rehab these units somehow through somebody else's money, and it's a part of your overall plan, let us know up front so that we can make sure it's included in the programmatic. Okay? Any other questions? Go ahead.
So, acquisition only, risk assessment, let any risk assessments done, minor issues, you like pay.
Right.
Or minor other non-rehab
Right.
issues. How, for home purposes, is that documented? How do you,
Well,
you have a
I mean, let me ask, I'll start that by asking you, how would you pay for those minor repairs in your program? Because that's where it makes a difference.
At this point, most likely sell it.
Okay, all right. So if Home's not paying for it, really, you're documenting that the house meets code after you made those minor repairs that didn't make the rehab standards or the property standards come into play. You start to get into a gray area when you start paying for that with home funds. So I would say if you've got a separate source to do those minor repairs, that's a much cleaner and easier way to handle it. Because you don't want to start spending home money on rehab when you're not doing a rehab program. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So for acquisition down payment only.
Right.
The environmental testing is still required.
The risk.
You need it for setup, correct?
Yes. All right. So there's two things you have to do. One is, first you have to basically, our environmental unit is looking at your program to see if anything you're going to do is going to violate any sort of environmental protection rules and regulations. They do a paper review to make sure you're not going to help a house that's like in a Superfund site or, some other thing like that. But there's two places where you have to get this checked in a home program. First is programmatically. It appears like everything you're going to do isn't going to harm the environment. And we're going to programmatically say, based on what you've told us about your program, that you're eligible to get started doing this rehab stuff or whatever you're going to do that might affect the environment. And then the second level is any house you're going to touch with home funds, before you do anything, you need to get your Tier 2 site-specific review approved by our environmental unit. And so what that means is you shouldn't be doing anything in terms of choice-limiting actions on a site until you've gotten that approval to move forward. Because I've had groups who forgot to get that done, spent $30,000, and because it wasn't a site-specific approved thing, that money had to be paid back to HUD. And, this has been around. I know I've talked to our environmental unit about this. It's been around since like 2009, this requirement with the state. It's not new. Nobody should be making a mistake on this anymore. You don't want to not get it's called Tier 1 is programmatic review, the overall program under NEPA. Tier 2 is your very site-specific, this particular unit they've checked. And when they do that site-specific review, you guys have seen the checklist from the old days when you were doing them yourselves, and, they're looking to see, they're doing a paper review to see, is there anything glaring that we already know about in the environment that means they shouldn't go here. Now, I personally one time did a homebuyer project where we were going to assist someone to buy a house and found out that it was a prior Superfund site from 30 years ago that still was under EPA stuff going on that had never been closed out. We found that out because of the paper review for the Tier 2. And we could not then invest federal money in that site. So not often, but there are some times where just by getting that Tier 2 review, you're like, oh, I can't do this house.
So we're paying for a third-party inspection.
Well, in terms of that tier,
directed to do
well,
that.
and how you can do this is, these environmental rules and the checklists and all that. I mean, some LPAs do it themselves. They have the knowledge, the expertise on their staff. They've done them themselves, but it can get kind of complicated, especially for in urban areas with a lot of stuff going on environmentally. So I would suggest that you do have someone who knows how to do this, do them on your behalf, and send it in. You can hire a consultant. You can use project delivery for that. So project soft costs. So, you can certainly pay someone to do them for you, to get the paperwork together, to send in so you can get it approved by our environmental unit. Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to verify with you that we are also going to require the certificate of occupancy for down payment assistance only also.
Yes. So even though there's no rehab involved, we talked about this. If you're not fixing the house in any way, you still have to tell us and show us that it's up to code when you help that person buy it.
Right, it would be an
Right. The thing is, here's the thing. I'm just gonna explain this a little bit because it can get difficult. So there's a couple different things that code enforcement departments use, and really, I'm going to be honest with you. What I found out is it depends on where you were at in the state. It's not uniform across the state in terms of local municipalities and code. And so because it's not uniform, it really depends. So you'll have some municipalities that won't even let someone pull a building permit, even though they're going to do a $30,000 rehab and tear off the roof. You have some communities where they'll make them pull a building permit for everything they do because they charge for it and can make money off of it. A certificate of completion is just stating that the things that you listed on the building permit that were going to be done have been done, but a certificate of completion doesn't assure me at all that there's no health and safety violations or code violations. So a CFC is not going to do it either, and that's why, we talked about in the presentation, and one of the issues has been is across, some of the code enforcement officers we've dealt with have not wanted to be liable for sort of grandiose statements that it meets code. So that's why we put in, okay, it can appear to meet code. There's no visible current code violations or health and safety issues. And so if they want to use that language, that's fine. But that's why a CFC, and almost exclusively certificates of occupancy are for new construction, but I worked in a city where I could get a CO inspection any time of the night or day for $50. So it just depends. It really depends on your local municipality and what they offer. Any more questions?
And I have a question about returning the note of mortgage or whatever to HTFC. And I just went through 2 audits. I just finished them up. And kind of follow up to the audits is they want to see the recording document, where it says the date on it, the
Right.
cover letter or cover sheet.
Yep.
Well, if that's being sent to HTFC, how do I chase that?
I would call your program manager because we get those originals back in our file. So they're recorded and returned to us. Okay. You could also take a copy of it the day of the closing, but you won't have the recorded thing on it. Yeah, you won't have the stamp on it. So. No, because it gets stamped once it gets to the county clerk's office. So, at a closing, it may be a title company who's going to take it from the table. So I would say that you can contact your program manager and we can get you a copy of that front page from our file. Okay. Any other questions?
One more question.
Okay, one more.
Resolution, you had said in the webinar that
Yes.
you didn't know if you were going to be constructing.
Well, someone asked about this. I don't think there's a need for us to construct anything because all those resolutions have to say is you accept the award from, the Housing Trust Fund Corporation, and that you're authorizing whoever it is, your mayor or your executive director or whoever it is, to execute the contract. So it's just about accepting the money and authorizing somebody to execute the contract. And that's all we want to see. And that could be a board meeting for a nonprofit, it could be a council meeting from a city, however you guys want to do it. But that's all it has to say is you accept the award and that you're authorizing someone to accept it and execute the contract. Okay, anything else? All right, well, thank you all for sticking around for half an hour more. And I see everybody ditched out of Syracuse, but hopefully everybody got all their information. Thank you all in New York City and Buffalo for attending, and certainly contact your program manager if you have any questions. Just want to show you, this is a Habitat for Humanity project here in the Albany region, just to show you some new construction there. But certainly contact your program managers for assistance. If you want us to come out and provide technical assistance, let your program manager know. And thank you all very much for being here today. Thanks for participating. Have a good day now. You're welcome.